And I didn't care. I didn't care about anything. And I found alcohol to be a solace for me, a place of solace. And I think this is indicative of the disease of alcoholism as well. I didn't have an immediate cause and effect relationship with alcohol and sexual assault. Meaning that I didn't think, okay, I went out and drank and this really bad thing happened to me. I didn't put those two things together. Instead, for me, alcohol became my solution. Alcohol became the thing that took it away, and alcohol became the thing that made me feel better, or at least at the very least, let me not feel at all. And so my parents had a very well-stocked liquor cabinet, hence the alcohol grandmother. So I would hit that often. If I went over to friends' houses, I would hit their liquor cabinets, and drinking became slowly something that I was doing on a weekly basis. And it was something that I was doing to cope. I didn't want to feel. I didn't want to even begin to try to understand the anger and the frustration and the depression that was festering inside of me as a result of this abuse. And so I had my first overdose / suicide attempt at age 13. And I say / suicide attempt because I don't really believe that I was trying to take my life. I think that most counselors and psychologists that you would speak to will tell you that an individual who's attempting suicide is usually trying to stop the pain, not stop their life. And that's exactly what I was trying to do. I wanted to show somebody, anyone who was willing to listen, that something's wrong with me. You know, I was like screaming on the inside, but I couldn't get the words out, you know. And so I thought, I'll show them. And so I conveniently took a bottle of my mother's Valium, because that was my little to her. And I ate her entire bottle of Valium, and I washed it down with a bottle of peach schnapps. And then I called her and told her. She at this time had gotten a job because the structure of our family had just fallen apart so much that she began working and my father was working. No one wanted to be in the home at that point. And so she didn't get a job out of necessity. It was more of, none of us wanted to be in the home anymore. And so I was rushed, an ambulance was called, and I was rushed to a hospital. And when I came to, my entire family was around me. And then the next thing I remember was waking up the next day. And apparently I had flatlined in front of my family. The pills kicked in, and I basically almost died in front of my family. And to this day, I can only understand the fraction of what that impact must have been for them. So I was immediately transported to a psych ward, because that's where they put kids who were trying to kill themselves. And I found myself in this psych ward with individuals, some who were like me, and others who were extremely emotionally and mentally distraught and with disorders and issues. And I was very uncomfortable. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to talk about what was going on with me. I didn't want to talk about what I had done. I didn't really know why I did what I did. I just knew it made the pain stop temporarily. And so I quickly learned how to emulate my peers who were there, and I learned how to talk the talk. I learned how to tell counselors and therapists what I thought they needed to hear from me so that they would just leave me alone. And that worked, and I was released. And so the summer before 7th grade, when I entered 7th grade, again, very different person. I didn't want to go to school. I hated school. I couldn't sit in my skin long enough to actually stay in a class. You know, I was just so incredibly uncomfortable. And so drinking quickly led to smoking marijuana, which quickly led to dropping acid, which became really popular in my school when I was 15. I had started getting into bars as early as 15. Back then, it was really easy to manipulate a license and an ID, and club owners and bar owners were not as hypersensitive to carding individuals as they are today. So, and I looked older than I was, so I easily got into bars and I was drinking. And my best friend at age 15, who had some similar issues as I did, and we would every now and then talk about, she was sexually abused as a child, and she was the first person I was able to kind of articulate that with and almost put a name to it, but we danced around it. We weren't comfortable enough to really talk about it, but we had this kinship because I knew she recognized me in that way. And she ended up taking her life when we were 15, and she shot herself. And I was one of the first people at the scene of the crime because I was supposed to have slept at her house that night. And so that was extremely devastating for me. And it was just another kind of blow that I was dealt that I didn't know how to deal with. And so I just upped my use. I upped my drinking. I was absolutely a blackout drunk. And what I mean by this is that if I picked up one drink, I would drink until I blacked out. I think some normal people must have like a switch in their brain that once they get to a certain point of intoxication, it's like, okay, they stop. I don't have that switch, or it's broken. So I would literally drink to utter intoxication and to the level of alcohol poisoning, which would oftentimes lead me to throwing up. I was not fun at parties because I was the girl puking early on in the bushes, in your car, in your mom's bed. I was just really not a functional drunk. And at 17, someone introduced me to cocaine. And cocaine had just started kind of becoming big in my school. And again, I went to a well-to-do suburban school. And cocaine was again coming into our school, and I started dating this guy, because at this point I'm dating guys because that's what I think I'm supposed to be doing, and at this point I'm so confused about sex I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be doing. But I knew that society was telling me I should be dating men. So I had boyfriends, and my boyfriend was a drug dealer, which was convenient. And so what I learned quickly was that if I did cocaine, it enabled my drinking. And what I mean by this is that I could drink like 5-6 beers, and that would normally be the point where I would enter into a blackout. If I did cocaine, it woke me up. And I would almost say sobered me up, but that's obviously not the right term. But it allowed me to not black out. And so, therefore, I could drink all night long. I could drink longer, as long as I partnered these two things together. And I say that cocaine became my great enabler, because for me, it was always about drinking. It was always about alcohol. Alcohol was my first addiction. It was the thing I loved to do. And so I found this, incredibly toxic combination that enabled me to do that. I could then go out, stay out all night, and drink to the degree that my friends could, and I wasn't, puking or blacking out. And because when I blacked out, bad things happened. When I was 17, I was at a New Year's Eve party with all of my closest friends at one of my best friend's cousin's house, who was much older than we were. And he furnished all the alcohol and allowed us to have a party at his house. And that night there was no cocaine to be found, so I drank to my normal excess. And when I woke up, I discovered that her cousin had raped me while I was blacked out. And so here I was, once again, having been sexually violated, and having to go home and tell my father, which I did, and then having to walk through this kind of criminal justice process once again. To get back to the first sexual assault, he ended up pleading guilty to a much lesser charge, and mainly because my parents made the decision that they didn't think I could handle going to trial because of the overdose. So they let him cop to it was criminal attempt rape, which I really had a problem with because there was no attempt about it. And he only served for 2.5 years. And they never told me about that because, again, we had this silence in my house. And so I actually learned that while I was doing research for the book. I actually thought he was convicted of rape. And it wasn't until I did research for the book that I pulled the criminal records and I realized that he pled to criminal attempt. So here I was again, 17 years old, having to file a police report, having to have a rape exam done. And this time he pled to rape, and he had a laundry list of criminal offenses. And so he went away for a pretty long time. But again, it was just another reason for me to continue to get hammered. And still at this point, I did not see a correlation between alcohol and drugs and bad things. To me, alcohol was still the solution to my problems. It was not the problem. I was not willing to look at alcohol as my problem. And so as I proceeded through high school, I was failing left and right. I had to go to summer school 3 times. I had to take additional college credit courses just to graduate. I didn't go to school because I just didn't care. I didn't care about anything anymore. I didn't feel because I was numbing myself all the time. I didn't know how to feel. And I just really didn't, like I said earlier, I couldn't sit in my skin long enough. I was so uncomfortable with who I was and with all the stuff that was going on inside me that I couldn't articulate, that I would just rather be gone. I just wanted to escape. I wanted to be high. I wanted not to be present. And so I did eventually graduate high school, though. I think I knew enough that I needed to graduate. I watched my eldest brother graduate, and then my other brother got his GED. I watched him drop out in 11th grade, and I watched him struggle to get a job. And so I knew enough that, all right, I need to graduate. This is kind of important. And so I did graduate. And so I had no aspirations of going to college. 0, none. Obviously, I did not take the SATs. I wasn't there that day. I missed 87 days of my senior year, and I graduated with a 1.5 GPA. Not very proud of that. So I was not a college application waiting to happen in any way, shape, or form. And so as all my friends started to go off to college, I thought, I'm going to have to join the workforce here. And the problem with getting a job is that they expect you to show up. And I was really good at getting the jobs. I was a great interview, and I'd go and I'd get these jobs that would have and could have led to good careers without a college education. I just didn't show up because I was still partying at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning while I should have been punching in. And so I was not, it was not conducive for gainful employment, and I lost a lot of jobs. I abandoned jobs, I was fired from jobs, I lost and was abandoned and fired 36 jobs from ages 12 to 22. So I have pretty much worked in every discipline, in every field that you can imagine. And so I was just dysfunctional. You know, there was no structure to my life. It was absolute and utter chaos. It was all about partying. You know, I would sleep until 4 o'clock, get up just in time to shower to be at happy hour. I mean, my life was just centered around my use. And I made sure I surrounded myself with people who used just as I did, which obviously, as you can imagine, the circle of friends that I had got smaller and smaller and worse in terms of, you know, good people, upstanding citizens in society. It wasn't until, in high school, I lost 7 other friends. Most were due to alcohol-related deaths. Some were drunk driving incidents, some were freak accidents, some were overdoses. But during my high school time, I went to 7 funerals for 7 individuals that I was either close to or acquainted with. And for me, it was just 7 other reasons to get high. You know, I never processed anything, I never felt anything. I just used everything as the next reason to get a little bit higher. And the individual that I was dating at the time was the cocaine dealer. He was dealing drugs, and he also smoked crack. And this was something that had just started to kind of come into our area, and it was just kind of on the radar screen in the early 90s. And I always was like, I'll never do that. I'm from suburbia, I don't smoke crack, it's a street drug, you know. And it wasn't until I got this phone call from my aunt that my cousin had OD'd and died. And this was a cousin that I was very close with. That I turned to my boyfriend, I just said, you know, get whatever that is, give me it. And I tried it, and it did for me, unfortunately, exactly what I was looking for it to do, and that's it left me completely and 100% numb. And so I ended up smoking a lot of crack and getting very addicted to that drug. And as you can imagine, it took me to places that you know, I shouldn't have been, running the streets in the middle of the night, buying drugs in neighborhoods that I never should have been on my own, by myself, that today I know I would be shot or raped again. And so I was living an extremely dysfunctional life. My parents had divorced when I was 15, which I knew was inevitable. It was coming. Like I said, my whole family structure kind of broke down. And instead of my mom staying and my father leaving, my father stayed, my mother left. She said, I don't want to be a mom anymore. I'm kind of done with this. And she never really was a very functional mother to me to begin with. But she was my mom. And so I, like most daughters, sought her love and affection and acceptance daily. You know, it was, I call it in the book that it was just another drug that I couldn't live without. You know, she was always incredibly verbally abusive of me, but I still reached out every day for that dose of abuse because she was my mom, and I wanted that love, and I wanted that acceptance. And it wasn't until 97, actually early 96, that she got diagnosed with breast cancer. And you heard Dave kind of read a passage out of this part of my life. She and I were not very close. We had daily phone contact, but we weren't, you know, I didn't see her a lot because I lived with my father or was living kind of on my own at times. And so when she got diagnosed, I really stayed away because I didn't want to watch. I didn't want to watch that process. She went through chemo, she lost her hair. It was horrific. And my way of dealing with it was just to do more drugs and drink more. And it wasn't until she wound up in the hospital and it was clear that she was very ill and wasn't going to make it that I was able to sober up. And I did sober up for about a week and a half. And I was there for her. And I was able to take care of all of her things in her final days. She wasn't planning to die. She was, 50 years old. So she didn't have the things that people at the end of their life will have. She didn't have a will. She didn't have accounts taken care of. And so I spent my time during the day doing all that. I took care of her accounts. I took care of her will. I did all that. And then in the evenings I was there for her and I would nurture her and I was able to get power of attorney over her. And slowly as the days passed, she slipped into a morphine coma. And but I was able to care for her, and it was a very tender time for me to be able to do that with her. And she wasn't really able to talk much, and so we didn't talk a lot. But we were really tender with one another, and we were able to make what I call a nonverbal amends that was really important for me. And her whole crazy addicted family showed up, and it was the drama fest that a lot of addicted families tend to surround themselves in. And once they all left, my mom came too. She came out of the coma. And I was one of the only ones in the room because it was myself and 2 of my cousins. And I really, really believe in my heart of hearts that my mom waited for me. And so I was able to lie in bed with my mother, and I held her, and I held her when she died. And it was an incredibly horrific event for me, but it was also incredibly beautiful to be able to watch life leave and to be able to kind of surround her with all the love that I had in my heart, you know. And it was really a way that we were able to make an amends that I don't think we could have done verbally, or that would have cost fortunes in therapy. And so I stayed sober, right? Stayed sober through the funeral. The minute, you know, the last hand that I shook, the last condolence I received, I walked right to a bar and I got hammered. And I proceeded to get intoxicated and hammered for the 3 months that followed my mom's death. And I was drinking and doing drugs in excess that I had never done before, because I always drank to stuff my feelings, to not feel. And so I always knew the kind of level that I needed to maintain in order to not have to feel. But this was a power and this was a pain that was greater than anything I'd ever felt. And it didn't matter how many drugs I did. It didn't matter how much I drank. I could not push this pain out of my body, out of my spirit. And I kind of described it as, you know, I had all these emotions and these feelings, and I kept pushing them down, masking them with drugs and alcohol, and it was too much, and they were brewing out of me, and one night it just erupted like a volcano, and I did try to take my life. And this time I meant it. It was after a 2-day binger where I had drunk more alcohol than any human being should ever consume, including, the recollection I have are 7 Amstel Lights, about 6 shots, a bottle of Asti Spumante, a bottle of TG, IF, Mudslide Mix, and I ended my night with a bottle of Sky Vodka. And that was just me. And then I proceeded to take every pill that I had in my apartment. I was living in a skanky hotel apartment complex above this bar that I was working at, which was obviously convenient for me at the time. And then I proceeded to slice my wrists. And I really, really, truly tried to kill myself in a very horrific way. At some point during this attempt, I called my father. And at this point, my father had remarried to a very wonderful, wonderful woman who is now my stepmother, and who really came into my life and provided a tremendous amount of nurturing for me and really gave me that mother figure that I didn't have. And so I left a message on their machine on a Saturday afternoon while they were out shopping, which I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for them to come home and hear that message. And so they sent my brothers over and they broke down my door and they found me half conscious in a pool of blood in my bed. And they scooped me up and took me to the very hospital that my mother had just passed away 3 months prior.